All right, we are live. It is a Tuesday, and we are doing our Keto Study Club today because of the holiday here in the United States, 4th of July, Independence Day. So let's cue our intro, and then we will head into studying.
It's so groovy.
That's my little nerd dance.
Awesome.
Are you going to do your, the dance she did on Friends? Remember, Elaine, she couldn't dance.
Oh, that was on Seinfeld. That was on Seinfeld.
Seinfeld. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Whatever she was doing.
Yeah, Elaine.
I vaguely remember that.
She was doing the.
That's right. That's right.
I don't have any room to talk. I'm not dance inclined so much, but I do it anyway just for fun. But I don't.
I love to dance, but I haven't done it in years, really, other than just around the kitchen.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we're not gonna talk about the quality. It's just I have the love for it, right?
Yeah, me too.
We will not subject anybody to any of our dance moves here.
Not today.
Yeah. Awesome. Good morning.
Hey, Jeannie, with two N's.
Good morning where you are. It's afternoon and evening for us. So
yeah.
Good to have you here. Awesome. Okay, so we left off. We're still in chapter 1 of the Ketogenic textbook.
We might not ever be out of chapter 1.
Well,
we might not. It would be 10 years going into chapter 2.
Yeah. But because it's like a lot of pages. But anyways, we're trucking along. It's interesting. So we left off at section, let's see. We finished, what all did we finish? We were talking about, what's his name? Weston Price.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're going to start talking about somebody called Major General Professor Sir Robert Carrison. That's a lot of prefixes. So,
indeed. He was highly honored, I guess.
I guess so. I guess we'll learn about him. So it sounds like it's going to be interesting. So we can, let's see, I think last time we started with Carrie reading. Why don't we start with Kim?
Wait a minute. We ended with me.
That's okay. I don't remember who we end with.
Okay. So
I think we ended with me because didn't I read the summary? I think
maybe. Yeah. Okay. So, we're at 1.1.2.3. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Major General Professor Sir Robert McCarrison studies the different diets of Indian peoples living on the Asian subcontinent. The quest for proper nutrition for the masses became a subject of public concern in the British Empire at the beginning of the 20th century. This situation called for a more systematic scientific approach to find proper nutrition solutions to health, which could be applied to large industrialized societies. One of the original pioneers of this research was Major General Professor Sir Robert McCarrison. Now that is annoying.
I know. Right. Well, I don't think we're going to have to call him that every time.
We're going to call him McCarrison from here on out, I feel
right.
like. Okay, McCarrison was the first scientist to study the effects of nutritionally deficient diets, establishing how particular nutritional deficiencies caused specific medical conditions, including goiter, cretinism, and beriberi. On the advice of 1932 Nobel laureate Sir Charles Sherrington, McCarrison accepted the position of Director of Nutritional Research at Coonoor in Tamil Nadu, India. There, as Sherrington had suggested, He set about investigating the dietary patterns of the different Indian communities across the Asian subcontinent. Subsequently, in the prestigious Cantor lectures, McCarrison reviewed the findings from his early work. His methods were simple. A large number of albino rats were fed either good or faulty diets, modeled on the diets of healthy Sikhs from the Punjab in the north and the less healthy madrasas from the south. During this research, none of the thousands of stock control albino rats fed the good Sikhs diet ever became ill. From the experiments on several thousand deficiently fed rats, McCarrison provided a detailed list of some 80 ailments, all recognized in humans, that were found at autopsy in animals eating the deficient diet. The ailments affected most bodily organs, namely skin, eye, ears, nose, lung, alimentary tract, urinary tract, reproductive system, blood, lymph, endocrine glands, heart, and the nervous system. McCarrison also identified a deleterious influence of a faulty diet on mental function. In one experiment, he tested the diet of the poorer classes in England that consumed mainly white bread, margarine, oversweetened tea with a little milk cabbage and tinned meat and tinned jam. The experimental rats, he wrote, were nervous and apt to bite the attendants. They lived unhappily together, and by the 16th day of the experiment, they began to kill and eat the weaker ones amongst them.
Oh.
Yeah. When they had disposed of 3 in this way, I was compelled to segregate the remainder. McCarrison wished to determine if these different dietary patterns might explain the different body shapes, physical abilities, and disease patterns in the different ethnic groupings in India. Indeed, nothing could be more striking than the contrast between the manly, stalwart, and resolute races of the north, the Pathans, Baluchis, Sikhs, Punjabis, Rajputs, and Marathas, and the poorly developed, homeless, and supine people of the east and south, Bengalis, Madrasas, Kanaris, and Travancoreans, he wrote. McCarrison noted that the Pathans were meat eaters, whereas the Bengalis, Madrasas, and Kanaris were, for the most part, vegetarian. He found that in humans, as in rats, there was a strong correlation between diet and health. He found that the Madrasas, who lived mainly on plant foods, were between 2 and 10 times sicker in a range of illnesses than were the Punjabis. His explanation was, as we pass from the north to the east, southeast, southwest, and south of India, there is thus a gradual fall in the nutritive value of cereal grains, forming the staples of the national diet. This fall reaching the lowest limit among rice eaters of the east and south. There is also a gradual fall in the amount of animal protein, animal fats, and vitamins entering into these diets. He concluded that protein was an essential component of a healthy diet. It will be obvious from these considerations that insufficient ingestion, absorption, or assimilation of proteins, or of proteins of the right kind, will tend to degradation of vital processes. A degradation manifested in stunting growth, poor hygiene, lack of energy, resource and initiative, digestive disturbances, and impaired action of glandular organs. While he understood that proteins from plants were labeled second-class proteins, he recognized their value to the peoples he was studying. The use of milk and cheese should be greatly extended. Much greater use should also be made of the better class vegetable proteins, such as those of soya bean, legumes, and nuts, and much less of the flesh of animals. Apart from every other consideration, the use of meat as a main source of proteins is as uneconomical as it is unnecessary. Yet he argued, the poorer classes, according to the degree of their poverty, drop out in part or whole. The more expensive or less easily obtainable items, milk, milk products, animal fats, legumes, fruit, and vegetables. So that the people are poorer and poorer in their diets, are more and more cereal in nature, more and more imbalanced, more and more depleted of animal protein, animal fats, vitamins, and essential nutrients. Does somebody else want to take over, or do you want me to?
You're almost done.
A key weakness of this poor diet, he observed, takes the form of an excessive richness of the food in carbohydrates. Ultimately, McCarrison contributed this wisdom that continues to be largely ignored by the medical and dietetics professions. The newer knowledge of nutrition has revealed and reveals the more with every addition to it that a chief cause of physiological decay of organs and tissues of the body is faulty food, wherein deficiencies of some essentials are often combined with excess of others. It is reasonable, then, to assume that the dietetic malnutrition is a chief cause of many degenerative diseases of mankind. However, this may be, it seems clear, that a habitual use of the diet made up of natural foodstuffs in proper proportions to one another, produced on soils that are not impoverished, is an essential combination for the efficient. Wait, hold on. Yeah, is an essential. Oh my gosh, I've lost my place. Hold on. Diet made up of. Hold on. Sorry, of natural foodstuffs in proper proportion to one another and produced on soils that are not impoverished is an essential condition for the efficient exercise of the function of nutrition on which the maintenance of health depends. This, combined with the proper exercise of the body and of its adaptive functions, is mankind's main defense against degenerative diseases, a bulwark too against those of the infectious origin. Such, at least, is the conclusion to which my own studies in deficiency disease have led me to. And I know nothing so potent in maintaining good health in laboratory animals as perfectly constituted food. I know nothing so potent in producing ill health as improperly constituted food. This, too, is the experience of stock breeders. Is man an exception to a rule so universally applied to higher animals, to the higher animals? His key message summarizes so much of what is the goal of the authors contributing to this textbook. Some years ago, I made the statement that the newer knowledge of nutrition is the greatest advance in medical science since the days of Lister. When physicians, medical officers of health, and the lay public learn to apply the principles which this new knowledge has to impart, then will it do for medicine what asepsis has done for surgery. I see no reason in the later days to detract from this view. On the contrary, there is every reason to emphasize it more, particularly in regard to preventative medicine.
Okay, well, that was a long section.
That was a mouthful. And I know what Lynn did. Lynn wanted Kim to read first because of all those complicated words.
All those,
and
yeah,
names.
I looked ahead. Yes,
she was like
all those crazy names, and I went, "This is Kim." Let her.
She said, "I'm going to get this hillbilly to read this."
Let's catch up on comments here. So, hey, good to see you back.
Hey.
Jay's here. Hey there, Jay.
Jay, Sandra.
Morning, rough night and up late. Oh, so sorry to hear that.
Oh,
Kim,
man.
you need coffee.
Okay.
Yeah, and then she'll be up all night.
Love
So
it.
you know
Yeah,
what I need? I need new glasses because these
Oh.
are supposed to be, a little bit of a bifocal, but they're not quite bifocal enough.
Ah, okay.
I
Okay.
rarely have to read like this.
That is true. So it's interesting that he was talking about, he'd been emphasizing the importance of the soil, which we know is a problem. And with getting proper, good, food, because he said it has to be produced on soils that are not impoverished, which I don't know. I heard, is it something like 70+% of our soil now is depleted? I don't remember. So I've heard 70, I've heard 90.
I've heard various numbers, but they're all too high in my opinion.
I can't remember.
Yeah, but it's
I remember hearing that, but I was thinking it was 70, but I'm not positive.
Yeah, I don't know if any of you watch and know. Let us know. But it's now I'm assuming they use rats for their experiments, because rats will pretty much out in nature, they'll eat anything. I guess they can eat meat. They can eat, they eat whatever, they're scavengers, right? So they'll eat whatever they can find. So I don't know, what is the proper rat diet?
I mean, you can learn a lot from rats. I mean, I know a lot of preliminary experiments are always done with rats, but then, there's just a part of me, it's like, they're rats, they're not people. So a part of me is like, how much should we really, because if we deviate, I mean, I wonder how much of that stuff that are things that those particular rats never really ate. It's kind of like the rabbit study where they fed them a bunch of saturated fat so that their arteries would clog up with cholesterol, because rabbits don't eat that stuff. So naturally that happens. So that's just something that kind of went through my mind when I was hearing this.
And I mean, I'm gonna look up species appropriate rat diet and see what I can.
A lot of people are rats.
Oh, yeah. See what I can find out.
Yes, Jeannie, they are. A lot of people are rats.
True. But you think about it, I guess. I mean, rats. When I think of rats, I think of Charlotte's Web. Did you guys ever watch Charlotte's Web, like the cartoon of the rat?
Years ago.
Yes, that was eating everything. When they went to that fair, and the rat was going absolute crazy, and would eat everything. But I don't know, is that really the case for rats? Will they eat anything, or are they a lot pickier?
Right, and that's kind of like goats. My son and his wife have goats, and people say that they will eat anything and clear out your land for you. Well, they are selective. They will only eat certain things. So they'll clear a place out or clear out an area of certain things, but then other stuff is still left overgrown because they don't eat it. So it's not true that goats will eat anything.
Okay, so there's some myths surrounding, or stereotypes surrounding goats and rats and their eating habits, that they will eat. And maybe they're like people, when they don't have other things, they'll eat anything.
Mm-hmm.
But I just looked it up. It said protein and fat are essential for rats, but it also mentioned that they need to have fiber. Okay. So with that said, I think we should, but the fact is that when they fed them the poor human diet that the poor people were eating, they developed some pretty serious health effects from that.
Like killing each other, and stop and think about what's happening nowadays.
Yeah.
Well, maybe they were killing each other because they were like, we need some real food, and
maybe they were doing some rat cannibalism,
or the lack of enough protein and fat just affected their brains.
Yeah,
which is probably the case. So we have table 1, 2, which, gosh darn it, I should have planned ahead and made a slide, but I didn't. But there's a table here of the diseases detected at autopsy in rats and other animals fed the faulty Indian diet. So this is the group that was fed the diet that of the poorer areas, the poorly developed, toneless, and supine people of the East and South. So they tended to eat more of a, plant-based diet. And Mike says, and they didn't even have social media. I know, my goodness.
Right.
So, so by system, I'll just kind of start reading. Maybe this could be my reading.
Oh, look at you. And then look at
the next section with Carrie.
1.1.2.4.
We'll split up the next section. but basically, let's see. So it goes by system first. So this is what happened to them when they ate the diet of the poorer people. So in their skin, they lost hair, they got gangrene of the feet and tail, dermatitis, ulcers, abscesses, and edema. Their eyes, they got conjunctivitis, corneal ulcerations, xerophthalmia, panophthalmia. I don't know what that is. Cataracts. Their ears, they got basically ear infections and pus in the middle ear. Nose, they got rhinitis, sinusitis, lungs and respiratory system, a whole slew of things. I'm not going to go through everything here, but every single system, the GI tract, they put dental disease in the GI tract, but I know that your teeth definitely affects your gut for sure. But they had dilation of the stomach, ulcers, new growths, two types of cancer in the stomach, ulcers in other parts, intussusception, which is interesting because that's where the colon kind of collapses inside of itself. Which means obviously there's a weakening of the colon wall. So that's very interesting. But it's a condition of the lower bowel suggestive of a precancerous state. So something's happening with that bowel tissue. The reproductive system, they ended up with endometriosis, problems with ovaries, death in the utero of their fetus, premature birth, uterine hemorrhages, testicular disease. They got anemia. Their lymphatic system, they got cysts and abscesses in large glands. In their endocrine glands, they got goiter, and they got adrenal hypertrophy or enlarged adrenal glands. The shrinking of the thymus gland, hemorrhagic pancreatitis. In their heart, actually, it's interesting because they showed cardiac atrophy, which is like weakening, right? Shrinking. And then they also got hypertrophy, which is more of an enlargement, myocarditis, pericarditis, hydropericardium. So they got fluid and around the sac of their heart. Their nervous system, they had all sorts of neurological issues and even degenerative lesions, beriberi. Two more systems. Their bone, they had to end up with a crooked spine, distorted vertebra, and then in general malnutrition, generalized edema, scurvy, and pre-scorbutic state. So they had a lot of problems with these rats.
They sure did.
With all of these poor effects. So it makes me wonder, do rats, like, if you feed them these diets, do they develop things? I guess because they have like a shorter lifespan, would they have a tendency to develop these things quicker?
And I wonder, I guess that many of these conditions, if not all of them, were like simultaneous within the rat. Yeah. It's in other words, it's not like they just got like one thing, like anemia. There were a whole slew of things.
Multiple organ problems. Yeah.
I would think so. I would think that, considering their lives are shorter, they would develop faster.
I would think so.
Just a guess, but I'm looking at like a proper rat diet for feeding your rats, like your pet rats. And it looks like they are pretty omnivorous. They eat mealworms, which, that's meat for them. And then, they eat broccoli, apples, beans, bananas, carrots, berries. So, their diet is pretty
But
diverse.
when they tell you to feed that to your rat, I mean, is that kind of like human advice? Where, I mean, would rats just like in the wild? I mean, maybe if they get desperate, they would eat anything. But I mean, like if they had their druthers, would they actually eat that stuff? Because like we were talking about before, you know, like cat food that I had bought for my cat at one point had peas in it, and it's like,
Yeah.
so it's like,
It says that in the wild, they eat grains, seeds, nuts, vegetables, bird eggs, and chicks, small animals like mice and squirrels, insects, or even dead animals. So it sounds like they really do eat a bit of everything.
Eat what they can get their
Eat
hands
what
on.
they can get, yeah.
Yeah, so these were peasant rats. They were they got to eat a
Mike,
peasant
listen,
diet.
I think Mike needs to come on one of these shows with us.
Yes, I know.
He needs to read
Seriously.
the next book for sure because he always adds some
That's right.
humor.
Okay, so the next section is kind of large too, so we can split it up. It's like really long.
Oh no!
Oh
Let's
no,
not
it's one
split it
page.
up.
That's right, it's one page. Okay. So Carrie, you decide how long you want to read, and then Ken can pick up.
Okay. I mean, I can read.
I
I can read.
feel like Lynn got off easy.
I got off easy.
Okay,
Go ahead, Carrie.
1.1.2.4. Doctors Cleve, Campbell, and Yudkin describe the dangers of sugar and the saccharine diseases. In the course of his career as a naval surgeon sailing around the world, Captain T.L. Cleve, in collaboration with South African physician G.D. Campbell, okay, I'm sorry, my brain went, anyway, I have a bad mind, formulated the hypothesis that a variety of medical conditions, including dental caries and associated periodontal disease, peptic ulcers, obesity, diabetes, colonic stasis, and its complications of varicose veins and hemorrhoids, heart attack, coronary thrombosis, and certain gut infections are caused by diets high in sugar and refined carbohydrates and should therefore be termed the saccharine diseases. As a result, in any disease in man due to alterations in his food from the natural state, the refined carbohydrates, both on account of the magnitude and the recentness of the alterations, are always the foods most likely to be at fault and not the fats. Cleve and Campbell built their hypothesis on evidence that global sugar consumption began to increase exponentially after 1850, increasing fivefold within the next century, reaching 110 pounds per individual per year in the United Kingdom by 1950. They next compared the health and diets of Indians living in India with those in South Africa. Despite eating less carbohydrate and more protein and fat, South African Indians had a much higher rates of type 2 diabetes, which Cleve and Campbell concluded must be due to the roughly 10 times greater consumption of sugar, 110 versus 12 pounds, by Indians living in South Africa. Wow. Next, they showed that urbanized Zulu-speaking South Africans in Durban, who also ate more sugar than their rural compatriots, developed high rates of type 2 diabetes after living in the city for over 20 or more years. This became known as the rule of 20 years, as it takes 20 years of exposure to a high sugar diet before type 2 diabetes develops. Cleve and Campbell also noted that until the disastrous rinderpest of 70 years ago, the Zulus of South Africa had been predominantly meat eaters, so that they wondered if the more carnivorous peoples of the world are more vulnerable to the diabetogenic effects of the consumption of refined carbohydrates than are the more vegetarian peoples, or are they less vulnerable? The studies of O'Day and her colleagues support this interpretation, as they clearly establish that Australian Aborigines are insulin resistant even when eating their traditionally very low carbohydrate diet. Perhaps this can be generalized to all populations that traditionally ate carnivorous diets. Cleve and Campbell next presented evidence that type 2 diabetes is more common in countries that eat more sugar. Like Weston Price, they argued that the rising incidence of type 2 diabetes in American Indians, the Inuit, the Icelanders, the Black Jews who moved to Israel from Yemen, and the Pacific Islanders coincided with the adoption of the high sugar Western diet. Interestingly, Cleve and Campbell understood that obesity is not due to diabetes, nor diabetes to obesity, but both arise from a common cause. The evidence is now clear that they are correct. Insulin resistance is the underlying condition that is present before the development of either obesity or type 2 diabetes.
Can I interrupt for a second?
Yeah.
So he was talking about how they were questioning whether or not the people who are their normal diet is more carnivore tend to be more vulnerable to diabetic effects when they consume refined carbohydrates. And that was a question they were asking, but it kind of made me think of, remember when we went through table 1.1 and we had that discussion about insulin resistance? And we were not sure how to interpret it. And you brought that up because it says carnivores have a natural state of insulin resistance. And we were talking about that.
Yeah.
That was like on session 2 sessions ago. And this is we kind of thought, I thought that your explanation sounded, reasonable. And this kind of brings me back to that they were looking at people who traditionally ate carnivore, that they became more easily, did they become more easily insulin, sensitive or resistant when they started eating carbs than people who grew up on vegetables. So I don't know. I couldn't tell. Did they actually answer that question, or is that question still kind of hanging out there?
I think it's hanging out there right now.
Yeah.
Because I didn't really see anything that would give an answer to that. And then they went on talking about obesity and diabetes. So
yeah.
Do you see something, Lynn, that you thought gave an answer?
I didn't, but I went ahead and wrote table 1.1 next to this paragraph because I just want to keep it in mind that was possibly related to what we read there, is at least that they were thinking that.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully we'll get the answer, but at least they were thinking about that.
Yeah.
Although it does say that they support the studies of O'Day and colleagues support this interpretation. So he doesn't go into it tremendously, but he does allude that there were other studies that kind of confirmed it.
But here's the thing.
Could have been, but not that we could generalize it to everybody.
Yeah, it says though, right after that part, it says they clearly established that Australian Aborigines are insulin resistant even when eating their traditionally very low carbohydrate diet. But there again, see, Dr. Ben Bickman talks about this and how people mistake physiological insulin resistance with, like, when you don't eat a lot of sugar and carbs and you don't have the stores of the sugar of the insulin in your liver. And so it can, for example, you can fail a glucose tolerance test because you don't have that little starter bolus of the insulin. And I'm wondering if they were maybe interpreting that occurrence, because you go back to normal. It's just if your body isn't accustomed to having that,
so maybe they saw those initial issues during that adjustment phase and didn't necessarily, maybe started to jump to some conclusions. So Mike says, let's see, they may be saying that carnivores have less metabolic flexibility. That doesn't seem logical. But I mean, maybe it is.
Okay, so I think it's important to remember that what we're talking about here is true carnivores. You know what I'm saying? Like, unless you think that humans are carnivores, like undoubtedly carnivores, which I don't know. And I don't think that we definitively know that from what I've learned. But do you understand what I'm saying? I think when we're saying carnivores, we're not talking about people here. We're talking about like animals. You know, is it making sense?
Well, and they said that they're
I mean,
predominant.
they're not talking about people on a carnivore diet, is what I'm
Yeah.
Well,
saying.
right, yeah.
They're talking about like
predominantly
true, like
meat eaters.
a cat or something that's like a, obligate carnivore in the wild.
Yeah, they're saying that these people were predominantly meat eaters, but not
Or yeah, like
strictly
people that
meat
were
eaters.
actually carnivores. Sorry to keep interrupting, but I'm just trying to get it through my head. But I feel like we have changed our diet. Now we are carnivores, yes, but that's not all we've ever eaten for all of eternity. So, I don't know.
No, I do get that. In other words, like probably none of us ever came from a family that was carnivore. So
Yeah.
we ate just some of us might have had cleaner diets than others, but overall we just ate a little bit of everything, sort of like the 4 food groups. Like when I was growing up, that was kind of the thing, the food groups.
I mean, I just think that this probably came
They
out before
didn't.
like carnivore diet was really a
Right.
thing. You know what I'm saying? Like for people,
Mm-hmm.
except for certain groups of people.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. Proud to be weird. That's what Dr. Bickman talks about. It's physiological versus pathological, and that there's a difference in the way it presents itself depending on the circumstance in your body. So it looks like if you've been, like primarily a meat eater all, for a long time or very low carb, and then you have that glucose tolerance test, your body can't handle it because it doesn't have the tools readily available. It can go to the back room and get the tools, but it just doesn't have the tools right there. And so I am kind of wondering if that isn't some of what they saw. But
yeah, that might be.
I would love to ask these folks some questions.
Yeah, me too.
I know.
And
Sanders figure when we restrict anything, we become less able to cope with what we used. I stopped using milk 30 years ago, not because I was lactose intolerant. Now using cream with my eggs get instant tinnitus. Oh boy.
Oh.
So, I mean, I've heard about people that develop sensitivities to things.
Or they notice the sensitivity more because they've eliminated so much. And so then when you reintroduce it, then it's just a shock to your system.
Or you no longer have the enzymes to digest that, the bacteria to digest that, because your bacteria, your gut bacteria change depending on what you eat.
Yeah.
So like if I were to just eat a whole bunch of cabbage right now, I might do fine with cabbage, but like me just eating a bunch of cabbage right now probably is not going to go well.
Oh, I
know that for a fact.
I know it wouldn't for me.
I know I can't eat cabbage on even before I ate carnivore. I couldn't eat cabbage.
Oh, I could. I loved it.
I used to
I
love
love
it,
sauerkraut. Man. But anyway.
Yeah, I would end up in the ER. So Mike says my Italian side of the family grew up Mediterranean diet. Grandma lived to 94 with no real problems up to the last year. N equals 1. Yeah.
See, and I go back and forth with thinking like humans are supposed to be carnivores or not, and lately I've actually considered it as a possibility just because I've been listening to a lot of Bart Kay, and it makes sense, everything he says, it just kind of makes sense to me. And I mean, not everything, I'm sure, but like a lot of the stuff makes a lot of sense. And I'm just, I'm just allowing my mind to consider that because I've always just thought, no matter what I need to personally eat, whole foods are good for people. And, I've never even considered that like we might actually be carnivores, or supposed to be.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I mean, they talk about how the ancestral diet. I did start watching that video you sent from about Bart K.
I watched it.
And
Judy, Nutrition with Judy, she's so good. Judy
I love
Show.
her.
Oh,
I love
yeah.
her. Yeah.
She's amazing.
So yeah, Kim sent us a video of nutrition, and from Nutrition with Judy interviewing Bart K. And and he did talk about how the berries that were, it was only just like a couple weeks a year, right? That they had access to berries. So now that I am metabolically unhealthy, I feel like carnivore is the best way for me to heal. Yeah, I'm in the same boat as you.
Yeah, and see, that's how I've always thought, Mike. I've just thought, okay, it's just me being, super unhealthy right now. But I mean, then I blame myself a whole lot for that too, rather than like blaming what we have been, traditionally taught to eat. And
Yeah,
I don't know. There's a lot of factors.
Did you guys deviate from the way you ate growing up after you were on your own and buying your own food?
Yeah. Yeah, I ate a lot of fast food after I was once I got my driver's license, I was like, McDonald's it is.
Yeah. Yeah. I know I did. And I was actually metabolically healthy when I was living at home and growing up, and I was lean, and
yeah, I was too.
And it was the whole 4 food groups. I mean, my parents grew up, they were Depression era, World War II, that was what they had, was the 4 food groups. And that's what I grew up eating. And everything was just very balanced in small portions. And no snacks. I mean, we didn't snack.
Oh, no snacks.
I wonder, just like Mike's grandmother that grew up eating the Mediterranean diet and did fine her whole life, like if I had never deviated and had continued to eat the way my mom fed me, would I have ended up with health problems?
I think that I would have done a lot better because, when you start eating fast food, your body craves that. And I remember one of the most stark differences between me and some of my family members. I was in my mid-20s and we went on vacation. I went on vacation with my aunt and my cousin. They're from a smaller town that doesn't have any fast food restaurants. Okay. So they don't crave that type of food because they just don't really eat it that often. It's kind of a novelty, I guess. So when my aunt would stop and get something to eat, she would go to like a grocery store and get a spiral cut ham or something and just be eating it. And I'm like, I want some food. Like, let's stop somewhere. So we would have to stop at like Burger King and get me, one of the big chicken sandwiches or something. And I just remember thinking, wow, how weird is that like what we crave to eat is so different.
Yeah.
I just couldn't imagine somebody not wanting fast food, but that was what I had really, gotten the habit of eating living in a bigger city.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, interesting. So, yeah, this is it's very complex. It's not just a cut and dry thing. I think that when metabolically healthy people can probably live off of more than just one type of diet, but I do think that the meat-based diet the meat and the fat should be the primary, in particular the fat.
Yeah.
And make sure you're getting enough of the animal fat in your diet.
And then the whole Randall cycle thing, it was never really a reality for me until I watched the Bart K video today.
Oh, I haven't gotten there yet, but
then I was just like, wow.
He did an incredible job explaining that.
And also it was more beneficial for me because this is not the first time I've heard this. So I took biochemistry a few years ago, probably about 4 years ago, when I got my bachelor's degree in nursing, finally, after 20 years, right? And I loved biochemistry. I never thought I would like it, but I really loved it. But he just went over everything that I had already learned 4 years ago. So it was just reinforcing it and putting it in this perspective. I mean, it makes total sense. Like,
Mhm.
it makes total sense to me. And I think now I know which direction I need to head with my diet. Like, now I know that it is important that I cut out the fruit, even if it's just a little bit, if I want to get out of this insulin resistant state that I'm in.
Yeah.
Yeah. You guys have got to go see it. I wish I had the
Mhm.
link. I would post it in here, but
You know what? After we're done, we could all post it in the description
okay.
on our channel so that people can go take a listen to it. And one
Okay.
more comment, and then we'll pick up with the reading again. I wonder also how much being iodine deficient played into my metabolic health decline, because I stopped using iodized salt about 30 years ago. I just recently read Dr. Brownstein's book on iodine, and he kind of said that the iodized salt didn't really do a whole lot as far as iodine in our diets.
Like, it
But
was better than nothing. Like, it was
better than
barely
nothing.
enough to keep us from getting goiters.
It
They
was
say
basically.
it
enough.
evaporates.
Yeah, it was
A lot
enough.
of the iodine evaporates in the store.
Yes, and it was enough to keep us from getting goiter with the iodized salt, but it wasn't enough to meet our cells' needs, because it's not just our thyroid that needs the iodine, it's our whole body.
Yeah.
And so the amount, the RDA is just enough to keep us from getting goiter and not enough to nourish us, which is typical of all of our RDA, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. All right. Sorry, that was a big interruption, but I really
No, but
wanted
that was
to
a good
bring
interruption.
that
Yeah.
point up.
Yeah, so feel free to interrupt. I'll go ahead and keep reading because the new section starts on the next page. So
Okay.
this isn't that much more to do. And just stop me again if you have a good point to make or whatever. So okay. Cleve and Campbell's description of the saccharine diseases received strong support from Professor John Yudkin during his career as professor of nutrition and dietetics at the University of London from 1954 to 1971. Yudkin also argued that the diet of early man contained little carbohydrate. With the discovery of agriculture, the amount of carbohydrate increased and the amounts of protein and fat decreased. Increasing prosperity, both between countries and within a country, leads to an increasing proportion of sugar being bought in manufactured foods rather than as a household sugar. It is suggested that the effect of this is that wealthier countries and the wealthier section of a national population tend to have a higher intake of calories from the accompanying flour, chocolate, fat, and other ingredients of these manufactured foods. One of the effects of this contribution of calories from sugar-containing foods is to reduce the consumption of nutritionally desirable foods such as fruit and meat. In the wealthier countries, there is evidence that sugar and sugar-containing foods contribute to several diseases, including obesity, dental caries, there that is again, diabetes mellitus, and myocardial infarction. The known association of the prevalence of diabetes and of myocardial infarction with the level of fat intake is fortuitous and secondary. It is more likely that the primary association is with levels of sugar intake, which I have shown are in turn closely related to levels of fat intake. For suggesting this hypothesis and for devoting the latter part of his scientific career to the study of the medical consequences of this increased sugar consumption, Yudkin was demonized and ultimately excommunicated from the research community, losing his academic position and his status as a researcher, including all his funding. He was never under any doubt that the sugar industry directed his excommunication. It is difficult to avoid the conclusion that this is the result of the vigorous, continuing, and expanding activities of the sugar industry. And of course, we've been exposed to that information more than once in our prior books. And it's such a shame. I mean, because at the very least, there could have at least been dialogue, discussion. You so you shut them up because you don't like what they're saying, or it goes against what you.
Yeah.
It's crazy how much that seems to have happened in history in the scientific community. You know, it's like, if you don't go along with what we say, then we're just going to shut you down. You'll never
Mhm.
work again, you know? That's kind
Yeah,
of
you'll
scary.
never work in this town.
Yeah.
And it was the truth.
Well,
That's
it's
really scary.
interesting that he's talking about, this is from 1954 to 1971, that they talked about the wealthier countries, that they were eating more of the basically packaged foods that have the higher sugar, and it seems like it's flip-flopped a little bit, like somewhere it flip-flopped, because it used to be that the wealth was associated with eating the meat and the fat, and
Mhm.
they had the poor people were the ones eating the vegetables. But once the packaged processed foods came in, it sounds like he was saying it's the wealthier countries were the ones that were eating them.
I mean, once sugar came on the scene, sugar was like, you know, for the kings and queens, and it was like a fancy,
Yeah, like I
fancy
said, let them eat cake
delicacy,
up in
you
the
know?
chat.
Mhm. And then as time passed, it was almost I see what you're saying. So like the kings and queens and, like, the people of an upper status ate that stuff initially, but then it became more widespread and more trade. And I think what they're saying is, like, as the countries got wealthier and more people could afford
Mhm.
that stuff, then they started eating more of it. I mean, I remember in Laura Ingalls' book, for example, that she was embarrassed when Nellie Olson came to her house, because she had been to Nellie's house before. Nellie's parents owned this general store, and
Right.
they had store-bought sugar, the white sugar, whereas at Laura's house they had the brown sugar that they had made, themselves. And so it was at that point, sugar was, that's a clue anyway, that to me, that
Yeah.
sugar was like a status symbol, sort of like today, if you had the brand new iPhone or something, or,
Yeah.
it was a status thing. And, you had the nice, sugar bowl with, with all that
It
pure
was
white
pretty.
goodness
It
in
didn't
it.
look like dirt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point. Interesting. Yeah, and the corruption dates back quite a ways, for sure, when it comes to industry trying to push their agenda. So, all right, Kim, you can read as much of this or little of this next section as you want.
Okay. Dr. Walter Yellowlees describes the changes in the health of a rural Scottish farming community in less than 40 years between 1948 and 1981. Dr. Walter Yellowlees graduated from medicine from Edinburgh University in 1941. He served with the Royal Army Medical Corps during the latter years of World War II, winning the Military Cross for outstanding bravery, for tending the wounded under heavy fire, and for being the last to leave the battlefield. For 44 years after the war, he worked as a medical practitioner in a traditional rural Scottish farming community, retiring in 1981. In 1993, he wrote his autobiography to record the precipitous deterioration in the health of the community he had served and observed. He wanted to explain what he considered to be the real causes of this rapid health decline, and to express his frustration that no one in his profession seemed to particularly concerned to expose them. If a GP, general practitioner, lives up to the traditions of his calling, he must forever seek to understand why this particular patient is suffering from this particular complaint. That tradition of his calling meant that in Yellowlee's world, the archetypal
Yeah, I think that's right.
GP is honor bound to take a much wider view, which encompasses not only the patient's disease, but also his way of life, food, relationships, and environment. The latter attitude in the Hippocratic tradition assumes that health is the normal inheritance of mankind and seeks to know what has gone wrong to disturb that inheritance. Or the doctor can view the patient's illness as an unfortunate happening, a haphazard quirk of fate.
Yes, and that's how it is now.
That's
so nothing is
every time.
Yeah.
In choosing the first option, Yellowlees discovered a perplexing paradox. He struggled to understand why, during the 20th century, thanks to better sanitation, clean water, preventative inoculation, and improved housing, the incidence of infective diseases caused by bacteria or viruses has greatly diminished. Yet, in his own medical lifetime, he had personally observed a dramatic increase in the incidence of degenerative diseases, the so-called diseases of lifestyle, which he concluded could not be conveniently rationalized by better methods of diagnosing or the aging of the population. His conclusion was exactly the same as those of Price, Cleve, Campbell, and Yudkin. It was that this alarming deterioration was a result of a change in diet, as sugar, refined flour, and processed foods had replaced the traditional foods on which his people had lived for centuries. Food and drink, highly processed and degraded by a multitude of additives, consumed by an ever expanding urban based population, inevitably brings a heavy load of degenerative disease. In Scotland, especially, refined sugar and constipating white flour. That's what he said, y'all. That's funny.
That is.
You did say that.
That's words in there.
In Scotland, especially, refined sugar and constipating white flour are still consumed in huge quantities. Obesity and diabetes are rife. The overall incidence of cancer increases. Yellowlees, like probably all of the authors of this textbook, could not understand why something so obvious to him was apparently beyond the understanding of almost all of his medical colleagues.
Yeah.
Something I wonder every day.
I do
too. But he suggested that there were probably three reasons for the wilderness of confusion about the true causes of the rapidly increasing ill health he encountered in rural Scotland. The first, he suggested, was the frailty of human nature on the part of scientists engaged in nutrition research who get a hold of an idea and refuse to accept any evidence, however compelling, which casts doubt on its veracity.
Oh, Lord, true words were never spoken.
Oh, yeah. Of all the books we've read for our book club meeting, we've seen that over and over and over again. It turns into an ideology, like directly from being a hypothesis.
Literally the opposite of true science.
Correct.
The second was the dominant role of commercial interests in determining the dietary habits of consumers, as well as in shaping developments in agriculture and in medical practice. Food manufacturers, he argued, equipped with their immensely powerful weapons of mass advertising, join the fray. They do so either openly to the consumer or through a more subtle approach to doctors and dietitians by financing research, publications, or conferences. As to the third reason, Yellowlees suggested that the medical profession had capitulated the face of these commercial forces. Doctors, he argued, are meant to be scientists, and science is supposed to reveal the truths of the material world. Instead, they had forsaken Christian values and become too scared to be deemed either judgmental or moralizing. The result he considered was this: the third and daunting part of my wilderness is the spiritual darkness which, in the second half of this century, has cast a deepening shadow over all our affairs. By darkness, I mean the loss of loyalty, honesty, integrity, and decency, without which human transactions revert to the violence and humanity of the beast. These sad trends follow the retreat of Christianity and the rise of humanist false prophets who preach the supremacy not of God, but of human reason. They seek to rule the world not by God-given wisdom, but by the power of money. Finally, he asked, are doctors to remain silent when they believe the truth is being perverted? His final conclusion sounds as if it came directly from Sir Robert McCarrison. Human health depends above all on sound nutrition. Sound nutrition means growing food and using it in accordance with nature's laws. All of food made unnatural by industrial processing. The commonest are refined sugar, refined flour, and certain processed vegetable oils. I know of no research that refutes this simple concept.
Yeah, so basically greed set in because there were too many financial incentives. And sometimes too, I wonder with doctors if they're so busy that they don't have time to open their eyes and pay attention and think, objectively about their patients, because it's just like boom, 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 one patient right after the other.
And that reminds me of the interview I watched. Let's see, it was Casey Means. We're going to be reading her book, and I watched an interview that was, I think it was like the metabolic something was the channel. But anyway, she was talking about this very subject. And of course, that was a huge reason why she got into, what she was, from being in medical school and being this specialist and ENT, and then, doing the surgeries and going from that to, to researching just, what happens with the human body and why we get ill and what actually truly causes it and all that. And she was talking about that, and that's a really good interview too. That's I think the second interview that I'd seen of her, but I believe these doctors, they struggle because they're stuck in this system, and you either get out or you just sometimes have to put blinders on, because even if you know better, if the doctor knows better, there are consequences by licensing boards and, standard of care, all these things that they have to follow. And it's really sad. And I know I've said this before, but but so apparently this has just been true for quite a long time.
Yeah, and I think that's why they're talking about how basically the doctor's moral compass has shifted, that all of the integrity and the truth and the honesty and everything that used to be part of the profession, it kind of, the moral compass kind of starts shifting a little bit.
Been beaten out of them.
Yeah, I don't think that it just is a sudden 180.
Right.
I think they can't win for losing, honestly. You know, like they are forced by these guidelines and by these standards that they're given. They're forced to check off all these things during your 15-minute visit. Mm-hmm. And honestly, is there even time for anything else? There's not. I mean, they're fighting a losing battle, and I feel sorry for them, because I know, I don't know any doctor that went to school just to get rich, because there's other ways of getting rich, But
and they have a ton of debt. That's for sure.
They sure do.
But they're just like cogs in the wheel that basically once you get in there, it's like it's hard to get off, because your whole livelihood is dependent on that. I mean, I can speak to that just from a nurse perspective. Like, I don't have to do a lot of the stuff that they do, but
but you're supporting families.
I can't just totally go against the whole medical system, because I'll lose my job, you know?
Right.
And I have 4 children, I mean, it's, so I do things like this where I can actually talk about things that I think are important and things that I think are beneficial to human health.
Right.
But I can't really, other than calling myself nurse, because I am a nurse, I can't really relate it to my work in that way,
Yeah. And it would
Mhm.
take a massive uprising of all the doctors just deciding, look, things need to change and we're just going to insist we're not going to do
Yeah.
it this way anymore. And that's, that's not going to happen, right? That would take a massive coordinated effort.
Oh, I love this. I was talking about Sandra's comment. She got her GP secretary on carnivore. There's more
Oh,
than
I
one
am
way
not
to
doing
skin
it.
a cat.
But we do have
Yeah,
somebody
you
here
go, Sandra.
from the India. I wanted to
Oh,
make
Oh,
sure to point that out.
wonderful.
Hi.
well,
So
I apologize for the pronunciation,
slaughtering the name.
slaughtering of the words.
Yes, but so
I do
glad to
apologize.
have you here.
Yeah,
Let's see.
welcome.
So, yeah, so
Welcome,
she
Rita.
said there's a difference between the malnutrition of the poorer section of our country and the mainly plant grain-based diet of the middle classes in India. So, yeah, tell
Yeah.
us more. Oh,
Mhm.
we have
Well,
another one.
I just assumed she was talking about like, we're just eating like all this processed stuff. And while they're grain based, I mean, at least it's like actual stuff that's real from the earth food, you
Yeah.
know.
So she says we have the highest diabetes metabolic syndrome in the world because of our high carbohydrate traditional diet in India. Yeah, wow. I have heard that.
I have too.
So,
And it was kind of surprising because I guess because typically, but for example, people have the mistaken belief that you cannot become diabetic or be diabetic if you're slim. And
mhm,
typically speaking, the people in the Indian population have a more slender body type, or
right.
even if they do start to put on weight, it's not just it's different. And we all have different ethnic backgrounds and everything, and so just a trait of theirs though is in India they tend to be slimmer. And so I was just shocked when I saw an interview with she's actually a doctor in India who had some very serious health issues. And that was where I first heard that stat. And I was just shocked that they have the highest diabetes.
Yeah, that's shocking to me too, because we don't hear about that really. I mean, we're so focused here on what's going on in the health in the US. And
Well,
I
we're
don't even,
told to eat what they eat too,
I
though.
assume,
Mhm.
true. We have a lot of Indian restaurants. I don't know about where you guys live, but I know in the West Coast, we have a lot of Indian restaurants and which people love. I don't know if it's traditional Indian food or not, but it's sure tastes good back when I used to eat that food. But I mean, and it basically fall into the stereotype because like I assume that because they're slender, they're healthy, like you were saying, Carrie.
Mhm.
And we see them as slender people, but I guess you can't. Sorry, my dog is barking. I don't know what my husband's doing. He's supposed to be watching the dog.
I think they can actually become not just people from India, but more slender people who develop metabolic dysfunction and they don't have that. It's almost like a protective mechanism to be able to gain a lot of weight,
Mm.
and
And
still
maybe,
not be diabetic sometimes. And that's
Mhm.
because their bodies got more places to shove the sugar,
Mhm.
essentially.
mm,
And it's shoving, it's cramming, the cars, the rail cars.
yeah.
And that then they don't get as metabolically unhealthy, even though they look more metabolically unhealthy. So, that's a
So
genetic thing.
yeah,
Mhm.
there's definitely a lot of like really obese people that don't like. I didn't have metabolic syndrome, and I was like 350 pounds
Yeah,
before,
because that's your body's
and my
that's
body was
your
compensating.
body's compensating. It's
Mhm.
trying its hardest to compensating and to
It was
compensate, and actually it's
shoving.
doing a pretty darn good job,
Yeah, it was shoving everything into the fat cells,
Yeah.
and
It's
yeah,
like,
I read that
"Okay,
that is definitely.
we got more, we got more. Here we go."
That's right. Shove more in there, and you'll just get more and more, fatter and fatter. But I did not have metabolic syndrome. So yeah, so good job, Sandra, getting your
Mhm.
GP on the secretary. Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was gonna tell Sandra, or wait, it's not Sandra, it's Sandra, right? Is it Sandra or Sandra? I think it's Sandra, isn't it?
It looks like
Let us
Sandra
know.
to me, but
I think it's Sandra spelled, or I don't know. I might be
Let us
wrong.
know.
There's a couple
Is
of
it
Sandras
yeah,
and Sandras.
Sandra? Is it Sandra or Sandra? I like to pronounce people's names right.
Yeah, me too. But anyway, what I was going to say is when I was at my dentist's office the last time, I actually talked to not only the secretary about carnivore, but I talked to my hygienist about carnivore, and they were both really like excited about, talking to me about it and stuff. And I gave them my YouTube channel too. So who knows? They might be
Same
watching
here.
right now.
I was just
If
yeah.
they are, I've been using my water flosser on a regular basis.
Oh, and
Yes,
you
be a
remind
good
me.
girl.
I got to use mine.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Sandra.
Sandra is One Hope for All. That's right. Sorry, Sandra.
Okay, Sandra. So yeah, I was just at the dentist for my teeth cleaning today, and I've been last time telling about the carnivore diet, and today when I checked out, the lady at the front desk was like, I haven't seen you in 3 months. Oh my gosh, have you lost a lot more weight? And like they were just going, oh my gosh, you look so good. And so that felt good. Yeah. And I told them about the documentary I'm working on and a children's book that I'm collaborating on too about the carnivore diet. So the
Oh,
dentist
wow.
said to let her know when we have it published and she'd buy some for their office. So that's cool.
Oh, that's cool.
Whoa.
To help teach parents how to teach their kids about, or to help parents teach their kids about, proper diet. So Rita says, I started developing typical metabolic syndrome problems on my traditional green plant-based diet, hence switched to the keto carnivore about 20 years back with Atkins diet. At 69, I'm healthy, fit, strong. Awesome. Fantastic.
Wow. Huzzah. That's amazing.
Yes, very good. So, and that was 20 years ago. It wasn't, I guess 20 years ago it would have been, the Atkins diet, but that's great. Excellent. Excellent. So Mika, hello. Awesome. Okay, good. All right. So, I got a nice small section.
Lucky you.
Yeah.
Yes, I planned it ahead of time, right?
I've got to wrap up though, because I'm on the keto cookout at 9. So that's
Okay.
here in about.
So we've got a short section, then we will
17
call it a wrap here. So this is section 1.1.2.6, which is just a summary. So it says is it really surprising that there is such a strong relationship between food and health, as McCarrison, Price, Cleve, Campbell, and Yellow Lees have described? It's so obtaining and digesting food is a significant part of humans' daily activities, one that involves the closest exposure of the body to its environment. We import relatively large chunks of the external environment deep into our bodies where they are processed before providing the building blocks for all our cells. The food materials we allow to enter our bodies can either provide the healthy nutrients that allow us to survive and thrive, or they can cause harm. Considering all the evidence presented in this chapter, it is difficult to avoid the conclusion that many, if not most, of the modern humans' ailments are the direct result of a faulty diet. But instead of embracing this clear evidence and consuming a diet to which our bodies are evolutionarily adapted, humans spend billions of dollars researching specific chemical treatments, patented pharmaceutical drugs, for each of these hundreds of different ailments, all of which are most probably caused by eating highly processed, unnatural foods. For we have waived responsibility for our food preparation to commercial entities whose highest priority is to lessen production costs while attempting to minimize and sometimes cleverly bypass government regulations, all in the pursuit of maximum profits, not optimum human health. Some 70% of the foods in the modern American diet, including wheat, corn, or maize, seed oils, and sugars, were not consumed during the 2.5 million years in which our species evolved. These foodstuffs can therefore be defined as non-species specific. That is, they are unnatural for consumption by our species. Moreover, the seed oils, soy, corn, and canola, which now provide 21% of the calories of the modern American diet, did not exist as food even 100 years ago. Sugar, which provides some 15% of calories in the current diet, became a commodity only at the beginning of the slave trade in the 1500s, with consumption already increasing eightfold from 1840 to 1895. Cleve makes the compelling point that since there is a latency period, perhaps 20 to 50 years before a dietary change can explain the subsequent epidemic of coronary heart disease beginning after the 1920s, any dietary change considered causal of that epidemic must have begun by the 1870s. The increased global consumption of sugar neatly fills that requirement. So interesting.
I have something funny that I need to tell you guys. I meant to tell you before, and I'll make it really brief, but through work, they have this incentive thing. And in a weak moment, they called me. And so you can get paid basically for doing different things. Like you talk to a wellness coach, and you can about imagine where this is going. So, and the coach was sweet. She was really nice. And so she called back last Thursday, and they sent me a link so that I could take this test to find out my real age.
Oh,
Now,
dear.
at first, I was going to lie, and I thought, you know what? This data might be de-identified, and who knows, it could be used like in some kind of a study. And I'm like, I'm healthy. I have no health problems. I'm metabolically healthy. I'm of a healthy weight. You know, I'm doing great. So I'm going to tell the truth. So guess what my real age is?
What?
62.
62
What?
based
Yeah.
on
I'm only 58. And you want to know what's making me older?
That
I
you
need
eat
to
red
get
meat
I
every
need
day.
to get my total cholesterol down. I
Okay.
need to have some fruit. I need to vary my veggies, expand my diet, eat more grains, and go easy on the red meat.
And move more, right?
They
Oh
didn't
my
say
goodness.
that part, but
It's too bad before
Oh
that
my
was
God.
done, she didn't know your date of birth or anything, and you could have said, "Hey, before we start, why don't you guess my age?"
right. Well,
Yeah.
she didn't see me, but I am good. Here's the thing: the questions they asked, they did
that
ask
was an
some
online
about
thing.
blood work and stuff. But one thing that they didn't ask about fasting insulin. They didn't ask about A1C. I mean, there were so many things that they didn't even ask about. And I'm going to mention it to her when she calls back the next time. I'm not going to be ugly to her, but I mean, I'm just going to kind of, maybe shed a little light.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, carnivore diet makes you look more youthful. I mean, I have people all the time on my channel telling me I'm looking younger and younger, and are surprised that I'm 56. So it's
I have people think that me and my 39-year-old daughter are sisters.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I believe it.
Well,
So,
guys, I hate to cut this short.
yeah.
Y'all can keep on if you want, but I have got to go.
okay. So next week, Thursday, back to the regular schedule, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is that right? And then
Yeah.
that'd be
Yes,
4:30
yes.
Central Time.
You let us know. Yeah.
Okay.
4:30 Central Time. You let us know, Kim, if anything changes for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, guys.
Awesome. Well, thank you
Thanks
everybody
for
joining.
coming.
Thank you, everybody.
Next
Y'all come
time.
over to the Keto Cookout here in about 10 minutes.
There you go.
Oh,
Go see
oh.
Kim.
All right. You can watch
All
it from
right.